Joining us to discuss further is Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So, all right, we've got Trump saying total obliteration. We've got intelligence assessments saying otherwise. Is there a way to actually prove who is right? Do we have pictures? Do we have IAEA inspectors going there or any plans to go there? How can this be proven?
Well, ultimately, I agree with your previous presenter right there. The truth probably is going to be somewhere in between. The language used by the president, by the way, is not military or technical language. Obliteration, destruction, severely damaged, degraded. These are not necessarily the same words, but these are much more common words used to describe the impact that one sees when there is a B-2 stealth bomber dropping the heaviest bunker buster bomb on a fortified facility. So it is not at all shocking that we don't know the extent of the damage, but we do know that any facility, any kind of above ground layer, if you will, would probably not be left standing or collapse on itself, given the weight, given the number, and given the locations of those munitions dropped at the weakest points of Fordo. The debates about how efficacious it was when it comes to the overall or larger Iranian atomic infrastructure and the strategy to potentially build back better, that I think with respect is a little bit more of a politically charged question. And with respect, some of the reporting we saw about the DIA report reflected that political charge, such as alleging that there was still secret facilities, yet these allegations came from people who never spoke about secret facilities during the period of the JCPOA, for example. So this issue very much depends on how you slice it. The only people, besides obviously espionage, that can verify if there is diversion, if these facilities are fully destroyed, and if there are attempts to build back better and again get back into compliance with the IAEA, would be the IAEA itself. And the Director General Grossi has said that while inspectors are in country, they have not been able to physically access these sites since the start of the war.
All right, Behnam, stay with us, because meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry has now come out and said that the country's nuclear facilities have been, quote, badly damaged in the American strikes over the weekend. Joining us to discuss these clashing narratives and to try to get to the bottom of all of this is Danny Ayalon and our I24 News correspondent, Ariel Osra. Now, the timeline here really is a little jarring. First, let's try to understand why Iran would come out and say something like this, that yes, their facilities were badly damaged.
Okay, well, with the Iranians, you cannot really believe anything that comes out of their mouth. So it could be that they're just trying to lull us to sleep by saying that it was badly damaged, and it indeed wasn't badly damaged, so they can basically reconstruct it quietly enough and quickly enough. But I don't think this is really the case, because on the other hand, it is really showing the vulnerability of Iran air defense, of Iran military apparatus. But one asterisk that I would put down is that the foreign minister of Iran said this in English to the international community, not to Iran itself. So this is why I think the jury is still out on what did he mean by that. But if we look into the real issue objectively, I think that the BDA, the Battle Damage Assessment, is still unfolding. Right. But I believe that we will know, more accurately. Still, it may take a few weeks before we really see the extent of the damage, although I do tend to believe the Israeli intelligence sources, the Israeli intelligence officials, they have proven that they have very good intelligence on the ground in Iran. Iran is fully penetrated. So I would say that there's a good chance that they are severely set back.
All right. And Ariel, I want to ask you here. You mentioned yourself, you said the word abrupt. The ceasefire seemed, at least to outsiders, a bit abrupt. I mean, we're in the middle of the IDF actively targeting targets in Tehran, in Iran, and then suddenly the U.S. joins, and then suddenly there's a ceasefire. Why not sort of take the time to make sure that the targets were met? Why suddenly this abrupt stop?
Well, I think the goals of this war were met, because the stated goals weren't completely destroying Iran's ballistic missile program, as well as not completely destroying the nuclear program. The stated goals were inflicting severe damage, were setting Iran's nuclear program, setting it back many years. And according to the current assessments, that is what was achieved. I think many Israelis feel a bit disappointed, saying that if Israel is already going at the head of the octopus, then why not just go all out and finish the job? But ultimately, it appears that there were other constraints, also internal economic constraints from this prolonged war, that put in the forefront striking Israel's economic capital, financial capital of the greater Tel Aviv area. But also, despite the opening blow, which was, you could say, all out, that wasn't really the pace of this war. Israel did consistently go after military nuclear targets, but it didn't employ all of its capabilities. And so that you extrapolate from that the goal wasn't to go all out against Iran, because also you have to take into consideration that this was part of President Trump's strategizing with regards to the negotiations, trying to better his position with Iran. So ultimately, I agree, there is some frustration internally in Israel that it didn't finish the job, but ultimately, in terms of removing the existential threat, as Prime Minister Netanyahu states, that was eliminated. And also Israel once again showing that in a post-October 7th reality, it is no longer allowing its enemies to build capabilities and for them to decide when to employ them against Israel. Israel will go after them, and the test now is up to Israel whether it will enforce its red lines moving forward, as it is doing right now currently in Lebanon.
All right. With the military operations concluded, at least for now, and the war potentially over, what's next? A diplomatic deal between Iran and the international community on its nuclear program, perhaps. Meanwhile, the Iranian parliament has passed a bill to suspend all cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, taking it a step further away from negotiations. Let's take a listen.
Despite the recent attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities, the International Atomic Energy Agency has not condemned them, not even superficially. It has undermined the agency's international credibility. And for this reason, the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran is suspending its cooperation with the agency until the security of its nuclear facilities is guaranteed. And Iran's peaceful nuclear program will proceed at a faster pace.
And back to our guest, Behnam Ben Taleblu. Trump said that he could strike again if necessary, but that now it's time for a deal. How likely would you say that that is to happen right now in your assessment with everything that's happened in the past few days?
Which being more likely, a Trump striking again or a deal being on the table?
Well, what do you think?
Well, I think there's no doubt President Trump is looking to parlay or log roll both Israel's military action as well as U.S. military action as a means to a much larger political diplomatic end. There's no doubt that even before entering office in 2015, when he was campaigning for term one of the presidency, he talked about buying bad deals and making them into good deals. I genuinely think Trump thought that he could achieve a deal within the 2-month window that he had given the Iranians back earlier this spring, and given some of the foot stalling and dragging, I think he warmed up to the idea of military action like this. And there's also something quite historic about 5 U.S. presidents talking about preventing such a thing, but him being the one to pull the trigger. But no doubt, I think he wants to do less in the Middle East, not more. His pattern of military action is short and sharp. I think the Iranians understood that. I think this still gives the Iranians a face-saving line of retreat. But the problem is this is a regime that is wounded. It is still lethal. It is still dangerous. And worst of all, it would lock in the kind of totalitarian terror that we saw after a military defeat was imposed on Iran's neighbor next door in 1991 with the Western coalition. And the decade of the 1990s, whether through diplomacy or sanctions or limited strikes, ultimately brought the U.S. to the 2003 conflict. So it's very, very important for President Trump not to take a premature victory lap here. And even if he is intent on going for a deal, to make sure that he holds the line and that the Iranians know the more they wait, they have a lot more to lose.
And if we take a look at the sort of regional picture or even global picture, big picture here, does an attack like this discourage other countries from pursuing nuclear weapons as intended, or could it have the absolute opposite effect?
There's no doubt countries that have nuclear weapons now will not want to give them up. I mean, but there was a trend line already that we saw in the post 9/11 Middle East. The fate of Muammar al-Gaddafi's Libya, the fate of Saddam Hussein's Iraq versus that of the Kim regime in Pyongyang, for instance. Some of those countries that had traded them away didn't get the security guarantees that they thought they would have gotten. Conversely, those that didn't have these kind of weapons were attacked. That has been operating in the background, not because of America's stance on nuclear weapons or nuclear proliferation, but because of those specific countries' enmity and bilateral relationships with the U.S. or with the Western world that put them in that particularly tough place. So I don't necessarily see it as a one-to-one. But when it comes to the axis, for example, Iran's nuclear armed partners and the axis of aggressors like Russia, like China, like North Korea, one reason they may be hesitant about rushing to bail out the Islamic Republic, given the fact that, I mean, they also have 1,000,001 of their own concerns, particularly the Russians in Ukraine, is because U.S. military action as well as Israeli military action proved that this would be costly. And that can have a deterrent effect in future U.S. crisis bargaining with all of these countries. And the more the president can put gaps between this axis of aggressors and to help disconnect the dots, the more an effective U.S. foreign policy we can see against these states in the 21st century.
All right, very interesting. Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you very much for your